Today, I'm really excited to welcome Mandy Hickson. Mandy shares her wisdom and experiences from the front line, operating in what I believe are probably the two most exciting and yet most frightening jobs in the world, as an RAF fast jet fighter pilot, try saying that when you're drunk, and now a renowned global public speaker. Mandy continues to navigate a remarkable journey from not only being the second woman to pilot the Tornado GR4, which included enforcing a no-fly zone over Iraq and facing decision-making at the knife edge of conflict, but to now where she sees her responsibility as using her learnings to help leadership audiences around the world. As if that's not enough, Mandy is also the author of An Officer, Not a Gentleman, a fabulous book title which points to her wonderful wit as well as her breadth of storytelling. Mandy, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Inspiring Women Leaders charity podcast today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I always feel a bit embarrassed when I hear all of that because I think, oh my goodness, I better be good now.
She's like, where do I stop? You can climb Kilimanjaro,
just stop there. Yeah, exactly.
So put us all to shame. But no, it's wonderful to see and real inspiration to us all. And actually, I think that takes us to our first question, which, if I think about if I went to a primary school or a secondary school and asked young girls and young women, what would they like to be when they're older? And I'm quite sure that fast jet fighter pilot would not be the top answer, maybe in there somewhere, but not the top answer because we don't really have that many role models out there. And certainly in my era, there wouldn't have been. So I wonder if we could start off by understanding your own story of growing up and what led you to join the RAF and how this has influenced your leadership today.
Absolutely. So how long have we got? No, don't worry, I'll answer succinctly. So I grew up in the outskirts of Manchester. So my parents divorced when I was very young. So I was brought up by my mum and with my sister as well. So two young girls and my mum. So she was a fantastic role model. And she was of the belief that anything is achievable if you work hard at it. And she sort of left us to our own devices as we did of the children of the sort of the 70s. We were allowed just that space to breathe and to grow and to basically take accountability for ourselves as we were growing up as well, I think. And basically I started hearing stories from my grandpa at a very young age because he was a pilot during the Second World War, and these stories sort of grew within me. And when I was 13, the Air Cadets opened their doors to girls, and I joined. And it was while I was there that I flew, and suddenly it literally ignited this passion, because as soon as I got airborne, I remember very clearly saying to the pilot, who was an RAF pilot, I said, "Excuse me, sir, do you get paid for this?" And he said, "It's my job." And I thought, oh my goodness, it was this sort of like mind changing moment when I suddenly realized that you could actually, a job didn't just have to be something that you did to get money. Because I think I'd grown up in that sort of society whereby everyone went to work and they went to work for purpose so they could have the weekends or the holidays. But it was this moment where you thought, actually, a career can be something that is passionate, that you absolutely love doing, that feels like a calling. And I think even at the age of 13, I recognized that, which was a gift inside itself. And that's when I thought, right, that's what I want to do. But women weren't allowed to be pilots at that stage. And so I kept on doing all the good things. So every opportunity that came along at school, I took it, from being head girl to captain of all the sports teams. I was a real keen bean. I think I just needed to be occupied. My mum always said, you just went to everything just so we could occupy you. So I joined like the Brownies, the Guides, the Rangers. I was in the Air Cadets, so every night was full with something that was going on just to occupy Mandy, I think. But I went on to actually hold sort of quite good leadership positions in every single organisation I was ever in. So there was obviously something innately within me that wanted to be the leader.
Yeah.
And so when I applied for a flying scholarship when I was 17, which would give me 30 free hours of flying, I was awarded that, but under the premise, and I went for the selection, I was told that I had an obesity problem, which I thought was fascinating. I was doing county sport, I was fit and healthy, I was a 6 foot tall, 12.5 stone woman. And they said, yes, you're obese. How are you going to remedy your obesity issue? And I was like, oh, well, I'll lose the weight, sir. And their height charts went up to 5'8". So they told me I should be the waiter for someone that was 5'8". I mean,
Wow.
I don't
Yeah.
know what I thought they were going to do with my head. That weighs a lot, chop a thigh off,
You don't need the armor, you
Well,
can fly
absolutely.
one-handed.
It was crazy. So I lost that 2.5 stone to be
Mm.
9.5 stone, which is what they wanted me to be,
Wow.
at 6 foot tall, which is just madness now. And that's how determined I was, though, to do it. That, I was doing my A levels and I'd go to the gym before school, after school, eat a Rivita, just to get this weight down to what they told me I should be. Anyway, got the scholarship from there, gained my private pilot's license. So that passion is still within me. Went to university and I joined a club called the University Air Squadron, which was really a pivotal, changing moment for myself, because while I was there in my second year, they changed the rules, allowing women to join. And I applied, and then I failed every single test to be a pilot. I was told that I'd passed to become an air traffic controller, and would I consider that? And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. But the boss of the club sort of said to me, look, take on being an air traffic controller, because when you look at this, you're our best, well, one of our better performing pilots on the University Air Squadron. I was doing really well. He said, the facts are, you're a good pilot. Why can't you pass the tests? Maybe the tests are flawed. And I have huge respect for him, because I just think he was this one person that said, actually, maybe the system's wrong, as opposed to, you're not a good fit for it. And so he challenged the process and found out that the majority of women were failing these tests. The majority of men were passing them. And so there was this unconscious bias that they'd been unaware of, because they'd simply never been tested on women. And in the end, it did take me on as a test case. While I was going through officer training, they changed me from air traffic controller to a pilot. And I was like, oh my goodness, over the moon. And then I'd read this letter and it said, we are taking you on as a test case to find out how far through flying training someone with no flying aptitude can get before they fail, basically, in black and white. And it was this magical moment, but it was also marred, because I was being told they wanted to see how far I got before I failed. And what do you think that did? I mean, what would you think that would do to me, Leigh, at that point?
Well, actually, in anybody else, I probably think actually there'd be the internal dialogue that would say, you are a failure. You put the blame on yourself. It wouldn't be about the system. It wouldn't be about the infrastructure. You would own and take accountability for all of the failure, and you believe that language, and it would push you down a completely different path. But clearly, not you. So
wrong.
What?
I did exactly what you said.
Wow.
Because it's a really interesting one. So when I ask corporate audiences that question, 99% of people put their hand up to say it made you more determined. It ignited you, it made you want to take them on and prove them wrong. Of course it didn't. You're a 20-year-old girl being told she's going to fail. And failure was never an option, but failure had not been in my thought process until that moment. But now they planted the seed of doubt that said, okay, you aren't good enough. Oh my goodness. And that would now note it would flourish to become imposter syndrome. Because every time I would struggle, whereas all the guys would go, oh, I failed a trip, never mind, I'd fail a trip and go, well, it's because I'm not good enough, and therefore it's one step closer to failing. Gosh, all right after all. And so there was all of this internal dialogue going on throughout the whole of my flying training that actually, put on top of the fact that you're the only woman on any course, it was quite a lot of pressure to be dealing with, really.
Yeah. And so what strikes me in this, because you tapped on you pushed through the open doors that were there ready to accept you in, but then there were ones that were really firmly shut. And actually, it's people around you. So whether it was your grandfather in the first instance that was even encouraging you or gave you the inspiration in the first place, but then the leader that also helped to kind of break down some of the biases and open the door for you, and encourage you to go through. So those external influences were quite significant. And at some point there'd be a flip across to actually where you got the... Did you notice when things flipped to actually being other people, and then...
I think it's a really interesting one, and I think it's a really great observation. And when I'm asked to speak at women's events, I say I have been lifted at every stage of my career by men. I literally owe my career to all the men that I've served with at every single stage of my career, mainly because there were no other women around, probably as well. But I mean, it was a very interesting one. Was when I was going through my fast jet training, I was at the very final stages of the fast jets, and I failed a flight, and then I got into this horrible spiral of loss of confidence, and I truly believed that was going to be the chop ride. In fact, I was put up for what's called the chop ride, and if you don't pass, you will be failing the course. And the seriousness of this was evident in the course in front of us. When we turned up, there was this guy called Squires was his surname, and
Mm.
his dad was the Air Vice Marshal or Air Chief Marshal, Sir
Yeah.
Peter Squires, and he was coming along to hand out their wings in the wings parade in the celebration of the fact that this course had passed. This young guy, Squires the son, didn't pass the course. And I would say that's a gutsy instructor that on 2 trips from the end, he chops the son of the
Yeah.
person who is going to be handing out the awards 2 days later. I'd say that's a ballsy move. But that just showed how there was this literally line in the sand. There's your cutoff. If you don't make the grade, you are out.
Yeah.
So quite a brutal sort of eat glass world at that stage. And I was failing this thing called battle turns, where 2 aeroplanes head off at low level and try and hit targets within 5 seconds, no real technology, an instructor airborne pretending to be, the enemy, trying to shoot you down from behind in that 3rd aircraft. And you are basically operating as a team together, but you have got a blind spot directly behind your own jet. So if you're an individual, you're going to fail because you can't see behind you.
Yeah.
But if you've got that wingman, you've got that mutual support, someone who's not just looking behind, but in fact 360 around you and helping that trajectory and working as a team, coordinating everything. And basically, it's a great analogy for life, isn't it? We're not going anywhere without a trusted wing person, but literally having someone like that on your wing is essential. But it means we must coordinate our turns, because if you just turn left, you're now in the 6 o'clock and you're of no help. You're vulnerable, you're exposed, and you'll be shot down. And so basically you have to think ahead. So as you're coming up to a turn, both aeroplanes pull up, you've worked it out, you cross at a perpendicular angle of 90 degrees, and then you roll out and you're in perfect formation. And this is what I was failing. It was all just too much. There was too much maths going on in my head, too many angles, too many degrees to work out. The speed was all too overwhelming, and I was always in the wrong place, and everything was spiraling. And I was sitting in my room with chop ride the next day, and there's a knock on my door, my course mate, who said, "Mandy, we're taking you out." I was like, "I'm not going to the pub, absolutely not." And they said, no, you need to trust us. And they took me to the bike sheds. And I will be on obvious trust waned at this point immediately. But we went on our bikes to this big parade square where the rest of the guys were there on their bikes. And these guys now gave up the next few hours to cycle in battle formation, yelling 30 starboard, 60 port, rotate. And we did all these maneuvers that I had been focusing on the minutiae of, on the degrees, on the angles to turn through. And they were like, "Stop it. You have no degrees. You have no map to look at. You have no numbers in your head, Mandy. Look at the bigger picture."
Yeah.
And suddenly we did this, and it was like, oh my God, this is so easy. And it was that feeling of what the guys offered me that night was this different perspective. I flew the trip the next day. It was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It went well. The instructor landed and went, "What on earth has happened? You were like flying with a different person, completely different pilot." And
See,
when I told him what had happened, he just said, "It's unbelievable. You're in competition. The guys have no requirement, no need to take you out to do that, because they were all guaranteed a slot on the next course that's coming. But now that they have, potentially one person might end up holding for a year to go to the next stage." And there was this moment where I realized this is what a team feels like. This is what high performing teams are like, where there's that trust, where you are unselfish in your actions, when you go the extra mile for those people around you. And that gift that they gave me that night stayed with me for the whole of my RAF career, of that go the extra mile for other people, because you never know when you're going to need them.
See, this really correlates with, we've got the image of the geese for the charity. We've got the Inspiring Leadership Foundation, we've got the geese, and there's the whole story. I'll put a link in the podcast after this, actually, but the story of the geese and how they fly in formation and how that uplifts the performance of the whole, the collective. And when one needs nurturing, if they're injured, if they're tired, then others gather round. And so they break up and then they find a new formation. And to me, that's just absolutely phenomenal around the power of team. And quite often leadership is, if I draw parallels to the corporate world, it's actually quite lonely. Even if I think about my own role as a CEO, you can sometimes feel very lonely. So you're kind of alone and you feel that loneliness. And I was really struck by this story of this team intervention. They did not have to do it. And we're working with leaders around the world and teams around the world at the moment. They're competing against each other rather than seeing kind of that single opportunity to work together and drive enhanced performance through the whole. What's your thoughts around that and how we can learn from, I suppose, the lessons of military or the work that you've been doing, your own experiences that other leaders can really glean from?
I think reflecting on what you were saying there as it being a very lonely place at the top. And I do know of many organisations, and I see this a lot, and I've been asked to speak at these ones whereby it's the board you can afford when you get a group of CEOs that come together and actually they create a collective and they get interesting speakers to come in. And I'm involved in quite a few of those ones whereby they meet once a month, but it really is almost like a mentoring amongst themselves, and not just the leader of that group, but actually there is mentoring amongst themselves, and that is incredibly powerful for them because it takes away that feeling of loneliness of thinking, oh my goodness, sometimes I don't want to share what's going on with the business with the people directly under myself, and actually getting guidance from other people who have been through similar problems. Your problem will never be the first time it's happened. And
Yeah.
so actually there'll be other people that can help. And that's really, really powerful. And that feeling of sharing as well. And we do see that. I think there is the underlying thing of the understanding the why. And
Mm.
I know it's very Simon Sinek, is
Yeah.
what is the why? But actually it's something that they talk about in the military all the time. You don't just get given a task, you get given a task to achieve this in order to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
having an understanding of the why at the heart of that is really, really important, because if something doesn't work, then you can work out how you can still achieve it, not necessarily on that initial track, but you understand the why and therefore how you're going to get there. And I think that is something that's also really powerful to be able to share collaboratively across businesses as well.
Yeah. So, and how do you get that ethos? I see it with Jonathan. We could be on the remotest island and on a beach somewhere, and all of a sudden he will meet somebody and it's just going, oh gosh, it's another person for them. You can kind of tell
Yeah.
there's a connection, there's something that runs through to the very core. The same with my son, who is in the police, my son Daniel. And they would put themselves on the line for each other.
Yeah.
And there's just something unique and so special about that. How do you transfer that into, I suppose, a world which is very different?
And I think that is the difficulty. And I've seen that with so many different of my friends who have left the military going, grass is going to be greener. I'm sick of the way that the military does this and that, the other. I'm going to go into corporate world. And they've gone into the corporate world and went, oh my gosh, the grass is not greener. The
Yeah,
culture is dog eat dog.
yeah,
And they therefore join the military network or the veterans network at the group in the
mm,
organization. And basically they're saying, okay, we're the little chunk here of like-minded people. How are we going to spread this culture of
yeah,
actually trusting each other out to the greater good? And of course, this has been emphasized and made far worse by all the remote working, because you're not building up that camaraderie. And I think it's that feeling of it's spending time together, firstly, but also putting yourself through positions whereby it's not comfortable. It's why people do the team building exercises of the high ropes, the go ape, because not everyone likes heights. And you
mm,
will see like your CEO suddenly at the top of one of these trees thinking, oh my gosh, I hate this. And you see vulnerability in people. And when you see someone's vulnerability, you see their authenticity, you see the real them. And
mm,
therefore, you might get the most junior person that steps up and say, let me help you. I actually love doing this. And
yeah,
suddenly that reliance that we recognize that we need to have on other people is emphasized. And I think in newer companies these days, we are seeing that because we're not seeing such a hierarchical gradient. I was speaking with a company coming up and they said, there's 8 of us on the board and it's almost flat. There is no gradient. And when we bring people in, I'm not saying it's completely flat, but their voices are so important.
yeah.
And we are seeing that in these newer companies that are coming out now.
Yeah, it's one thing that I'm really proud of with my team as well. And I suppose growing up and being a part of a family of 3, so there was my mum, my sister, and myself, and we've been through some really challenging times early on. So we kind of learned an awful lot about kind of containing things and compartmentalizing and holding things in and being strong and taking an awful lot on our shoulders. I had a few things going on looking after my mum not so long ago before she passed away, and there was quite a weight that was happening. And one of my team, I was always used to asking how my team were, but one of my team held their nerve and they said, "Leigh, how are you? Are you all right?" And whatever way they said it, they knew something, and
Was not.
just
Yeah.
and I cry. I don't cry. Okay, Jonathan, my husband, cries
I
before
was
I
going to say, I
do
think he
on
was
a
crying on my
constant
laptop.
basis. And
Oh,
so I'm the one kind of doing the looking after everybody. But in one respect, I kind of felt really deeply vulnerable because I didn't feel it was my role. And yet in another respect, in that tiny moment, I felt like actually we were an absolute team together working through, and they understood me as much as I was trying to understand them, and that they cared. And so it really took me off my leadership pedestal and
did
down.
you not think that that was important for them to see that vulnerability within you as well, and
Yeah,
for them to recognize that you are human and therefore, you also need help. And I think
yeah,
that's equally as important.
yeah. And it's so important, when we got to see people beyond the job title as well. We're not kind of moving kind of cognitive, intellectual heads moving from one office to the next, from meeting to
Yeah.
meeting, that there's something beyond that which is deeply human. And with boundaries, not to blur the boundaries too much, but between work and life and commitment and health and well-being, it's just so important that actually we just connect with people on a human level.
No, completely, Natalie. And I think when you look at surveys that are done on what are the most important qualities now of the CEOs of leaders today, almost number one is authenticity, you
Mm,
know, and vulnerability also comes in that list nowadays. That wouldn't have been in that top 10 a few
yeah.
years back. If you were to go back 10, 15, 20 years, it would be, all about communication skills, leading from the front, showing the stiff upper lip, that sort of thing. People don't want that now. They want that compassionate leader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so sticking with this then, because there is no such thing as an overnight success. And you spoke in your book, and actually I've heard you speak to Jonathan about the distinct kind of fear of failure, where your anxiety became almost like intoxicating and you didn't want to lean into it. So and an environment where it's all about bravado and not being vulnerable, because actually you're putting your lives on the line as well. There is something in that. How did you find a way to shed your armor and be vulnerable and to connect with people, build that trust at a different level?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. So I think that trust was really, really evident for myself when I was going through flying training.
Mm,
So I'm going to use the term band of brothers, and that's what it was. They felt like they were my brothers. I meet up with them now. They still feel like my brothers. The second we get together, there's no pre-talk and all that preamble. We're straight into real life and talking properly. And then I pinged out the flying training system and was posted to a squadron who had never had a female pilot. Now, I'm now going into the most masculine environment you can ever imagine. If you want to go, oh, it was slightly alpha. Was it alpha male? Alpha male doesn't even cut it. I could smell testosterone before I even entered the building. Because you're taking fast jet pilots, highly competitive, all men. Screensavers were all naked women. There was Pirelli calendars on every wall. There's no female flying kit. This was not an environment that was set up for women. They
mm,
changed a policy, but they had not changed anything behind the scenes whatsoever for women to actually serve. Um, and so, the fact that there was no female toilet was always an interesting one. I'd be in there in the urinals going, I'm in here, don't come in. I made a sticker in the end that just says Mandy's using it.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
he turned it on the front. But on detachments, I'm in the rooms with all the guys. I'm sharing showers. I'm in the queue. There's no privacy. There was nothing. You're not treated any differently. But to go to your point of how do you build trust was a really interesting one, because I have come in and I am assuming it's going to be exactly like it was going through flying training, but that takes years to build that trust. And
Mm.
suddenly they've got this woman coming in and it's upsetting the status quo. And who doesn't like it? The wives.
Ah,
Because
yes.
ultimately you're going away. Now, it wasn't that they might have been worried I might have an affair with their husbands, who knows? But I had my husband now, was my fiance, my partner, boyfriend at the time. So, it wasn't that I was single. It wasn't that I was, looking for, finding a man or anything like that. But there was still this doubt of she's going on detachment with my husband.
Mm.
And, but I think more importantly than that was when the guys go away with guys, it's almost like what happens in fight camp stays in fight camp. That sort of feel to it. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Mm.
Now they've got Mandy going. She's now going to see my husband in a different world. She's going to learn things about my husband that perhaps I don't want to know. That why should another woman know these things about it? And therefore it was hard to sort of build relationships with the wives. And I realized until I built the relationships with the wives and gained their trust, I was never going to be able to gain the trust of the men that I was serving with. Because if they're hearing a different dialogue about me at home, so then I started going to the coffee mornings. I started babysitting for their children. I'm in the mess, don't worry, I've got an evening. You guys go out. Mandy, you sure? Absolutely. And I realized very quickly that's what I had to do, because I had to build the relationships with the wives. So then they trusted me. Then they were happy with me. Then their husbands would be happy with me. And then it would be a sweet scenario. So it was just this whole shift of culture. And it took me, the worst time I ever had was when I was in the Gulf the first time and I was bullied by one of them, who was a very, very big character on the squadron. And he literally nearly broke me. I mean, talk about you're out of your depth already. You're flying in a war zone. You've only been in the squadron for 2 months. You don't have a relationship with any of these guys. I took 14 books with me, let's just say, and I intended just to read all my books. And then this guy started bullying me. And I'd never been a victim of bullying before. I went to an all-girls school. There'd not really been any bullying. It was, I just not witnessed this. And suddenly to find yourself to being a victim of bullying was just staggering. And I remember speaking to my husband. We had one 20-minute phone call home a week. And I rang him and I said, I'm going to quit. This is not the Air Force I joined. This is hideous. I hate it. And he said, Mandy, don't let one man take you down. And it was true. And basically, when I got back, he ended up practicing all these role playing all these conversations about how to have a difficult conversation. And so when the moment arose that I could tackle this guy, I did so in the bar as it happened in front of his wife, which she went, you did what to Mandy? And he was like, oh, did I? And then actually he literally reflected on it all weekend, came back on the Monday and said, I'm so sorry. I did every single thing he said. And then we had a good working relationship after that. But I didn't tackle him when we were in the Gulf. So I had nearly 3 months of literal coming outside and everyone fell silent.
Wow.
Every single briefing, every question was directed at me. I heard snide comments going on because he was creating this whole atmosphere around him about me. And it was horrible. There was no real reason for it. And afterwards, he just said, I'm so sorry. I was in a really dark place. My wife had just had a second baby. I was feeling angry. I wasn't there. She was cross with me. She had postnatal depression, as she had a 2-year-old and a new baby and had no husband, furious. Who did he take it out on? The guilt? Me. Because I'm both the only woman that's there, so he can therefore vent and get rid of his guilt in some ways by making my life unpleasant. And that's what happened. But an interesting time.
That's so powerful that you leaned in and you tackled the issue when so many would just be tempted to just walk away. But also I find it equally inspiring that actually, despite somebody being fundamentally wrong and even bullying in nature, because you can almost be protective of who you are, how you behave, you've got a narrative around it, you're living in self-deceit about why you behave a certain way. The fact that he stood up and apologized when that real conversation happened, kudos to him as well, because I think there are so many people out there that are almost like they put their armor up, they protect themselves around the feedback that they're receiving, that level of vulnerability that says, you know what, I have been wrong, and actually I'm going to rectify it, and not almost playing the bigger part. So kudos to him as well, I think, between you both.
And I think also kudos on that one to my husband for making practice these conversations, because one of the things I share now actually in my sessions, around having difficult conversations, is if you've never practiced a difficult conversation, it will go badly. But if you have literally thought about how you phrase something, then you've practiced it with someone and they have come back with a reply that you weren't expecting, but you've now practiced a response, you've almost gone through lots of different iterations. It's going to be very few responses that you might get that will shock you. And then
Mm,
you've got the response back, and suddenly it means that you can be assertive with your voice, but not aggressive and not emotional,
mm.
because you practice what you're going to say. And it's a real skill that Craig taught me, thank goodness, at a very early age of my career.
It's really important as well, because sometimes actually when we have issues and challenges like this, we think we should be able to immediately lean in and
Yeah.
tackle it. And then we go, but we're struggling with, oh, but we're not, and it becomes an internal narrative again. So it's this
Oh,
cyclical
yeah.
process where,
Yeah.
whereas actually everything just needs us to go, well, there's a challenge here. There's an emotional challenge, and that's going to affect how we think about things, and therefore practice, play with something, and then lean it. Really, really important, but almost like we check out and we're off on our little, we're rowing off to a little
Yeah.
island somewhere, going, actually just avoid it, and it just
Yeah.
gets worse anyway. Whereas
Yeah.
if we lean in, own it. There's some really great tools. Again, I'll put these into the podcast for anybody that'd be
Right.
interested in understanding about conflict management and having those conversations, to how to frame them properly. So thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. And I love the story. I want to take you to one, which is, because role modeling, you will be an ultra. There's lots of role models that are showing up. Potentially we're going to have a female president in the US, potentially. Who knows? And a very diverse government here in the UK, which is absolutely wonderful to see. Our first chancellor, female chancellor, and things like. So it's really exciting as a time for female role models and for people to look up to. And I think about your job, and it was rare. It probably still is extremely rare.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the story where you would say you'd be out on a night with your friends, and they would talk about, or tell the men in the pub that you're a fast jet fighter pilot, and they would respond with wise cracks and say, yeah. I'm an astronaut, and it reminds me of the riddle around gender bias. Where the son is rushed to ER. The attending surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy. He's my son." And it's like, how can this be? And of course, the surgeon is the boy's mother. But that answer had eluded people for decades.
Yeah.
But people like you continue to be the role models, the trailblazers that set the path for others to follow. And it should never be underestimated. Those role models are really important.
They are. And do you know what, though? I think those unconscious biases that we all still have them, by the way. How many times have you passed a building site and a woman walks out and you go, oh my gosh, and I do. And I think, Mandy, you shouldn't be feeling like that. But I tell you, I had an absolute brilliant one. It wasn't even that long ago. And I was doing a speech, and I'd said to them, what I love doing is I said, don't name me. Just say that you've got one of the an RAF fast jet pilot coming to speak to you. And that's on the agenda. And everyone will assume it's a man. Not one person will think it's a woman. And I was in the queue waiting for a coffee. I'm there, no name, there's been no pictures. And these two women went, oh, I cannot wait to meet this bloke. They're always really fit, And I was just like, I was listening to this. And when I started and I said, I walked on and everyone went, oh, and I saw these two women and I said, ladies, could you just say what they were like? No. We cannot say what we just said.
Yeah.
We all do it. So we all have this unconscious bias, and I'm as guilty as the next person. But I think that's where this whole bashing gender stereotypes. My husband and I have these conversations all the time where he goes, do we still really need to be doing that? And the answer is sadly, yes, we do. Because guess what? How many female fast jet pilots are there at the moment? Still under 10. There's still none, or very few. And I'm one of only 5 women that flew the Tornado GR4, which is just a shockingly low statistic. And you think things have changed massively. And actually, when Mike Wixton, who was the former chief of the air staff, when he took over, he was having a chat with someone who was a station commander at one of the training bases. And he said, out of interest to this guy, a friend of ours, how many girls, how many women have gone through the training? And he said, in my 3 years, none, not one. And he said, oh my God, we need to do something about it. This was a stage when, it wasn't necessarily handled in the best way, because they had this big outrage where they said, right, we're only going to recruit women and ethnic minorities because we need to swear. Of course, you cannot say that because it's a law, Discrimination Act and all of those sorts of things. But I could see where he was coming from. It was like, we've been trying to do it in a certain way for so long. And I think also all the women that had joined in my era we'd gone through and we kept our head under the parapet. And so many of them are still in the services that are still head under the parapet. But those of us that have finally pinged out the other end, we are now saying hello and here we are. But you
Yeah.
actually haven't had any of those role models while we've been serving. There might be the odd article in the newspaper that says, oh, wow, 2 women have flown together in Iraq or something like that. But generally out of, say, 15, 16, 17 years, not one, maybe 1 or 2 articles, because that our job is to do our job and not to be a woman in a man's world, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But now we're out the other end. That's when I now believe this is the legacy that I can leave, is a legacy of change, of facilitating people to go into these sorts of careers, that the ladder is down and welded.
Yeah.
And then others can follow up much more easily.
And there's a beautiful story that you shared recently. It's because you speak around the world. You are one of the top global speakers, aren't you?
Yeah.
I understand. As to CEOs, executive, global corporates, FTSE organizations. And yet there's a particular story of a young woman in the audience. Do you want to share that one? Because I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. So I finish my speech often, and in fact my finishes, it's a spoiler alert, everyone. This is how the book finishes. But when I left the Air Force, I rejoined as a volunteer reservist to fly young cadets. And I used to go back at the weekend, and these people would be from fairly disadvantaged backgrounds as well. So if you fly with them in the week, they'll be from all the private schools that have a CCF section, a combined cadet force, and you'll fly all the air cadets, but they'll be from the private sector. Come the weekend, it's all the air cadets who actually have actively joined an air training corps, air cadet organisation. And so I used to try and love flying at the weekends, to fly with those people, because it wasn't something they were having to do, it was something they had chosen to do.
Yeah.
And I was flying with this girl, and she was my last cadet of the day, and she sort of came out, and I thought, oh my God, my heart fell, because she had a parachute on her back, quite an angry look on her face. And I thought, joy to the world, a teenager at this stage of the day. And I said, hi, my name's Flight Attendant Mandy Hickson, what's yours? Oh, Emily. And I thought, oh God, she had so much eye makeup on, she could barely lift her eyelashes up, and I'm thinking, how will that work under G-force? To prevent the eyes opening. And we got to airborne, and it turned out she was the most talented aviator at a raw stage.
Yeah.
You can really spot when someone's got a natural aptitude, they've got awareness of the situation. Literally, she was silky smooth on the controls. Everything I gave her, she did it perfectly. And we landed, and I said, you know what? And she was still grunting at me. And I said, you know what, Emily, that was unbelievable. You're probably the most natural aviator I've ever flown with. And she said, I bet you just said it to everyone. I was like, I've never said to anyone, you're unbelievably talented. And she said, oh my God, you're joking. And I said, no. And she just suddenly went, it's all I've ever wanted to do. I was so scared I was going to fail. I decided not to try. I just didn't want to show you, and I didn't want to really go for it. And then just be told I was rubbish. And this storm came flooding out, and it literally sent shivers down my spine. And it really made me reflect on how often we all do that. We're told to lean in, like the lovely Sheryl Sandberg book, which I love. Lean in, grab opportunities, but I don't think we do it. I think we lean out, and what we do is we go, well, I could have done it if I'd ... and the leaning out is the ...
Yeah.
I would say is identify what your ... is.
Lovely.
What is your I could have done it if I'd ... because if you can identify that, it's probably the one thing that is stopping you from leaning forward and grabbing it. And I said, how are you doing at school? And she went, I hate it. I said, school enables this, you're brilliant. And it was like this cogs turning of, oh my God, there's the why, there's the purpose.
Yeah.
If I do this, then I can achieve that. I don't just have to go and learn about history because I got to learn about history. I can actually learn about it because I need a qualification, because I need to get this to do this. And she said, oh my God. And I saw her a year later, and she walked past me and she said, so pleased you're here. I've got my exams. I want to be a pilot just like you. And these 3 words, I'd just done my commercial pilot's licenses and spent a lot of money doing them, and a lot of ground school exams. And in that moment, just like you, she changed my direction, because she suddenly made me realize that I had potential to hopefully use my story to inspire other people, and to be that very visible role model, that I knew that if I went into the airlines, I potentially might not be able to do that as well. And I had small children. My husband was an airline pilot, and I thought, boom, how's that going to work with us both doing this job? And I do think that it was interesting, and I just want to finish this very quickly, because my husband said, I think you should change your speech, Mandy. I mean, you always end up finishing on the Emily story. And I said, it's really popular though. And it's the one that people quote back to me. And it's one that all the men burst into tears at that point and start crying and looking emotional. Because especially if they've got daughters, they go, like, And they literally, I get men hugging me, weeping at that point.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, it's a bit old. You've been doing it for a while." And then we went to this event in Latvia. Surprisingly, he came with me on that one. I don't know why. Comes to the cities that he's never been to before. So we're in Riga, do a speech, standing ovation. They had this word art at the end of
Mm.
2-day conference. Put up the one word that you're taking away from this event. And then we just watched Emily get bigger and bigger and bigger, so much so that you've got
Brilliant.
this humongous screen and the word in the middle was 20, 30 times bigger than any other word was Emily. And I looked at him and he went, yeah, keep it in. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely brilliant. It reminds me of so myself and Jonathan, we went across to the United Arab Emirates at the beginning of the year, and we cycled across the 7 states in
Wow.
7 days with athletes from around the world and Paralympic athletes, you name it. And it was absolutely superb, just
Yeah,
life-changing experience. And we went into different schools and universities. We did speaking events. It was just so powerful with people from different cultures, different backgrounds, very powerful. And we went to a special school with about, oh gosh, about 700,000 children there. And of course, we were all dressed up and we were donating sports equipment. They were coming in and we were doing high fives and all this high five and doing love you and all. And it was so lovely, this connection, this banter that was going on. And the next thing is we saw with one of the girls, and you knew there was a little bit of a spark of trouble about her.
oh, yeah.
She was looking, and you knew she was going to be a bit cheeky. And the next thing is she sticks the 2 fingers up at Jonathan, and, and Jonathan's face just fell. And I looked over, and I couldn't help but laugh. But I thought, you are the person that people will write off. You are the person that will be labeled as the troublemaker. You are and so many young people or so many people in life will be labeled as something. And I just want to draw attention to the sliding doors moment. That young girl, Emily, will have been labeled as something through her life, and that's became reinforcing. And
Yeah.
you came along, and in what we call the sliding doors moments,
Yeah.
just in that
Yeah.
moment that mattered, the moment of truth, is
Yeah.
you changed her trajectory just by having belief in her. And lean in
Com-
is all about, oh, you lean in, you kind of, it's about, and actually sometimes we've just got to collectively get together.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there is this, I mean, it's interesting actually, because there's this other girl in an audience when I was speaking at this school in special measures, actually, and she was very much like your girl. This girl had purple hair and quite a lot of piercings, let's just say. And it was in Southampton in special measures, and she was right at the front, and I was just getting this not much eye contact because you could see, but she'd been put there because she was obviously trouble. And at the end of it, the next day I got this email from the head teacher. And she said, Mandy, I'm going to quote you directly. And please excuse my language at this one. I might just do beeps instead so I don't actually swear. But she said, I've got to quote you directly. And I didn't pick her up on the swear words because I was so blown away. And this was one of the most intelligent girls in her school. And
Mm.
she was determined to go to college to do beauty therapy with her friends. And the school kept saying, you've got to do you're brilliant at the STEM. So it was physics, maths, and further maths. And
Yeah.
she was all over it. And they would say, you've got to go to college, you've got to get these A levels, you're amazing. And she'd
Yeah.
been determined not to. And she went up to the head teacher afterwards and she said, fuck it, if she can do it, I can do it. And she said, I'm so sorry to directly quote. And she said, I didn't even pick her up on the swear word because she said, I was so blown away. It was the first time that
Yeah.
that she'd actually gone, oh my goodness, because, I grew up in a very stable environment, but it was tough. There was no money, it was the suburbs of Manchester. It wasn't an easy time, as you would have known as a single, with a single mum in that sort of
Yeah.
age when there weren't anyone else was divorced. And, all of that was really quite tricky. And I think for her to be able to hear that story from someone that wasn't privileged, that hadn't been fed with the silver spoon from an early age, that had made her own luck, makes you realize that she could do the same. And that's where you say, every audience, I think one person, I just need to reach one person and give them that sliding door moment of just going, well, if she can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Now, you have spoken around the world, you've met a variety of different people. Working with the RAF, that takes you around the world. You'll have met different cultures, different leaders, a whole kind of diverse range of people. What has it taught you about diversity, inclusion, community, leadership? What lessons?
I think, interestingly, it wouldn't be from my time in the Air Force because there wasn't much diversity. I'll be honest. It was 99.9% men and white men. So very little diversity. Um, and I think on leaving, though, it's been really wonderful to work with businesses, and I love seeing that diverse. So one of my best friends in the Air Force, Matt, was gay, and it was illegal to be gay. He could have been put in prison
Yeah,
to be gay in the Air Force, which is shocking. I mean, anyway, I knew he was gay. It was hard. He actually ended up getting chopped from fast jet training because he was balancing these two worlds in his own mind, which was one of which I've told everyone I'm straight.
mm,
And I've got this real big sort of like story that I'm hiding inside myself. So talk about not bringing your true self to work. He wasn't legally allowed to.
yeah,
And so actually seeing his own journey as well, and he's a phenomenal speaker as well. He's now a pilot with British Airways, and I've got huge respect for Matt, and well, he's still one of my best friends. And actually that diversity, thank goodness things have changed, but they haven't. They are changing. I mean, there's so much around pride, and it's great to see, and I absolutely love that. I'm a huge champion myself for that. Um, and I love the businesses where okay, a classic would be Sainsbury's. I worked with Sainsbury's. I've done quite a few sessions with Sainsbury's, and I'm going to highlight them because they have got an incredible diverse workforce. If you
mm,
go into a Sainsbury's store, I would say, for example, my store in Winchester where I live, 70% are special needs of some sort of the
yeah,
staff, where they're bloody brilliant. They're not just talking the talk, they are actually putting it into action. And I think that is fantastic. Talk about being an equal opportunities employer, they are.
yeah,
And I love that. So I've worked with so many different businesses, and you do see a huge difference, as you will have done as well in your time. As you've made your way through the corporate landscape, you'll have seen that change enormously as well over the last 20, 30 years.
yeah.
It's a different one to the one that we entered when we started working 30 years ago.
But transformationally so, it might not feel that way
Yeah,
for current year, but as we look across the landscape and the decades, there's been a real evolution from where it was deeply
yeah,
toxic and unhealthy to where it is now.
yeah,
Major transformation has taken place, and I think we do need to celebrate a lot more of that, actually bring it to the fore, the
yeah.
journey that we have been on. I just want to take you to a little bit to trauma and when things in your life have been tough and challenging, because you were in combat. You were in the midst of the heat of between Iraq and different scenarios, surface to air missiles, and your life was out there on the line. And that you'll have been through some really tough challenges that will. I remember interviewing somebody for my book who was a field director in a war zone, and she recalled how she met the local militia one day with her team, and they were there with machetes and machine guns, and she thought that was her last day on earth. Can you share just a story or two around that, and how you managed through it?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few different ones I could pick up. On one occasion, I was engaged by a surface-to-air missile when I was leading my first ever combat mission in Iraq.
Yeah,
Um, as a junior pilot, I had to make decisions, and I was left to continue to lead. But actually, I'm not going to talk about that night. Actually, I'm going to talk about a different night, and it was a night when I was part of the formation. I think I was number four in a four ship, so we have one, two, three, four.
yeah,
And President Bush Jr. had just taken over the presidency of America, and we didn't know if it was a show of force from him, or what was actually happening as well was that all the telecommunications were about to go underground because they're about to engage in the entirety of their comm system was going to go into the fiber optics world. And
mm,
so all of our intelligence from the Gulf at the time, from Iraq, was coming from over land, and we were picking up that intelligence. If it went underground, we would almost be having our heads cut off with our intelligence levels. And so we were
yeah,
tasked to destroy a fiber optics center, which was very close to Baghdad. And it was a really, really high level mission. And we were going much further north into Iraq than we normally would. And we got airborne and we were heading off north. And my navigator said to me at one point, "Are your night vision goggles up or down, Mandy?" Now, if they're up, they're just, you can't see through them. It's like looking through two toilet rolls. And I said, "Oh, they're up." And he said, "Well, just leave them that way." And I was like, "Absolutely not." So I clicked them down at that point, and suddenly the whole sky, because it picks up any tiny bits of ambient light, is
Yeah.
picked up with tracer rounds, surface-to-air missiles, and now it's basically like firework night. I
Mm.
am flying straight through the middle of all of this flak that's going on. But at this point, I'm what's called a cooperative support for. I'm not dropping a weapon. I am basically going to be lasing a target. So my wingman would drop the weapon, and it would pick. It's dropped on a GPS coordinate, and then it picks up my laser energy so that the bomb is taken to the site of the GPS coordinate, and then the exact location within that building, which I am lasing, is a door. It's to go in the door, and it's then set to designate to go off once it gets into the basement. So it's not igniting as soon as it hits the building. It's, milliseconds later, so that you basically are targeting the right area. And we did the mission, and it was really we felt it was a success. It was all very clinical. We came back, we landed, and the Americans contacted us and said, we happen to have an unmanned aerial vehicle, Predator, a small aircraft above the whole of your mission. Would you like to see the footage? Now, as a pilot, you never get to see that perspective. So we went, yeah, great, why not? Lovely. And we went over and we watched the mission, and we watched the building, which is now highlighted and all in white and heat sources. And a man opens this door, and he's having a cigarette, and he's having a cup of hot fluid, which he finishes his cigarette, stuffs it on the floor, throws his rest of his tea on the floor, and you see this pool of bright white, which is the heat. He opens the door and goes into the building, and at that exact moment, our weapon goes into the other side of the building, and we see the building go dunk like this. And we all went, because this is the reality of war.
Mm.
You are not bloodthirsty. You're not joining the military because you want to kill people. That is not why you're doing it.
Yeah.
In this moment, I thought, oh my God, this is the reality of what we have done. And I know that sounds crazy, because surely you've got your head around that. And at that moment, the door opens and the man runs out. And we all went, oh, thank God. And it must have been,
Yeah.
it was literally in the door frame that as the building started to collapse, the door frame above him protected him. He ran
Mm.
out, got into his car, and drove straight through the desert, straight through a fence, which was hilarious, because then we could even see the fence going ping, 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 where it was unpinging as he was just driving in a straight line away from the building. But the relief that we had, and I think for myself, that made it brought home what we were doing. And I think that's really important, is that there's always going to be a consequence of your actions. It is not a flippant thing to do. If you are going to be engaged in a war zone, you will be carrying out acts which are going to be unpleasant. And that is what you've signed up to do. It's not something you take great pleasure in doing at all. And anyone that does, quite frankly, they shouldn't be in the military. You're doing it because you're disciplined, and that's what the job that needs to be done. But it made it very human.
Yeah. And there are different types of threats and risks that exist. And I kind of think about actually how we not just manage trauma, but manage mistakes within organizations and create a psychologically safe space for people to be. And there are those acts that are intentional and deliberate. There are ones that are tied to complacency, and then there are those that are unintentional. And I know that one of your favorite books is Matthew Syed's Black Box Thinking. And
Absolutely love
this
that.
really resonates. I used to work in the airline industry implementing culture change programs
Yeah,
during this really exciting period of
yeah,
growth. And then we had to manage through the horror of 9/11 and the terrorist attacks then, and what that meant for our air crews and our ground crews and our staff actually in the long term. And then we had our own subsequent air crash within the space of weeks. It was an air accident, but in Milan, which killed everybody on board. Within all of this, and I think about organization and cultures and psychological safety and creating the right environment for that, knowing that this is probably one of your favorite writers, authors. What's your thoughts around how we create that environment for people to do the work that they need to do, but in a space that supports them if mistakes are happening?
Absolutely. So it really is setting the tone at the top. So it's talking openly about mistakes. And I love when we talk about just culture. And there's a statement that we have within the aviation world, which is, what is a just culture? A just
Yeah.
culture is one that recognizes that competent professionals make mistakes, that those very same competent professionals will develop unsafe things that they do. It could be violent, stepping out of the rules. It
Mm,
could be, forgetting to do something or creating a new pathway. But there is zero tolerance for recklessness. And so
mm,
there's my line in the sand. Anything to the left of it is absolutely fine. I just want to know about it. And when you look at every single study that's been done about accidents, incidents in the workplace, they always come back to these same statistics. For every one major event that you will have 39. In some studies, it's 29.
yeah.
You will have 30 incidents, near misses, and minor events that a report had to go in for. But beneath your surface, beneath the water level, you will have 300 near misses where there's no need to put in a report because someone got away with it. If you are constantly looking at the 1 and the 30, you're always going to be reacting to what's going on in your organization. If you can have the culture whereby people are talking openly about their near misses, and now you're gathering data on your 300 near misses, you're now going to be much more proactive because you know what the actual risks and the threats are to your business. And it could be something as simple as, data entry. If you look at, for example, how many airline pictures, if you look up a misloading of an aircraft, there will be hundreds of pictures on Google of an aeroplane with its nose wheel in the air because somebody has put the decimal place in the wrong place on a load sheet. Millions of pounds worth of damage. Where was your learning? Now, obviously, that was a huge one, but how many times has someone got away with it before that one time that it happened? And they
Yeah.
went, oh my God, we nearly made that mistake. Never mind, we got away with it. Don't tell anyone. And I've had many times in my own experiences within aviation when I did get away with it and told nobody
Mm,
through lack of experience, through not wanting to look stupid, through learned helplessness. Well, what's the point? Nothing's ever going to change. And these are the dangerous dialogues that we have within the workplace. And this is why it's so, so important that we create the right culture, set the tone at the top, that the CEO does stand up and say, oh my goodness, I made a classic mistake at the weekend. I did this. And it just shows authenticity. And suddenly, any of the organizations I work with, and this is something, in case you were wondering, I am passionate about. There's one
mm.
that I did, it was with the police force. And I started off the session asking, who's made a brilliant mistake? Who's made a mistake they want to talk about? Silence. Brilliant. That's what I want. By the end of it, after the session, I say, who's had a 300 event that they're happy to share? Brilliant learning opportunity. I cannot shut them up because you're
Yeah,
reframing a near miss, a mistake as a brilliant learning opportunity. Like
yeah,
literally, it's in the case of an hour and a half, the dialogue has changed from it being a bad thing to make a mistake to being a good thing. And then I've been into stations afterwards where I've seen the 130, 300 circle, and it's been like, what's been your latest 300 event? They'll have boxes going, what's your 300 event? It's something as simple as that.
yeah.
What a powerful tool for change. It's brilliant. I love it.
I look forward to reading the next book, which
Yeah, there
or
might be
one of the
something in
next
that one.
books.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think actually we just don't know how to manage, those reflections, those reviews, and how we have the dialogue and the conversation around with ease,
Yeah.
allowing people to own up to mistakes, but also to work through, well, what does that mean? And then moving from tragedy and calamity to community. I love the story of during COVID when you and your husband questioned what you both could do to help the front line, because it's very rare these days. I look at the riots that happened in the UK recently, some of the things that are happening around the world, the far right movement that we're seeing far too much of. And yet, conversely, we're seeing just great acts of community and courage and contribution. But share with us a little bit about the story of COVID, but also your ethos around what that means, and your own legacy, what you're hoping to leave for moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting one. So I contacted the local hospital because I'd lost all my work because I was obviously booked as a speaker, and then everything just was cancelled. And so I contacted the local hospital and I just said, I've got nothing to do. I'm very happy to help. This is my skill set, project management, listed all the things, mother of teenage boys at the bottom. And I got an email back which said, we would love for you to help. Would you be happy to fold scrubs in the laundry? And I thought, yeah, that's exactly my skill set, because I am the mother of teenage boys. And I do a lot of laundry, as does my husband.
Deja vu.
All right. So we basically got a job, both of us, folding scrubs in the laundry, and we did it for just over 18 months actually. And we'd pitch up and we would do our shift, and it was in the laundry, in the tumble dryer, washing machine, tumble dryer, folding them all up, putting them on shelves. People were coming, I'd be assessing what size they are before I hand it to them. I'm like, oh, you're a red, you're a this, you're a that. And it was a really good eye-opener, and it was a classic example whereby sort of humble leadership, but these are the cogs. These are the people that do this day in, day out. It's not about the glory jobs. It's not about the people that just want to shine at the front. These are the people that kept it going. And if you didn't have those people, then you wouldn't have been able to provide that level of cleanliness that was needed so essentially during the COVID crisis. And it gave me so much respect for the people that are doing it, and it's just a really good leveler. And it's always been something, I think, ever since I've been a young girl, actually. I think doing things like the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, people sort of laugh at it as something that everyone does these days and all the rest of it. But actually, one of the things that you do in the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme is service, community service. And ours, I remember I used to go into the local care home, and we would sing or we would help out. And actually it gives you a sense of, you realize that giving, you get so much more back when you're actually doing that volunteering. And I think everyone always thinks, when I volunteer, it's about me giving something. That's not the case. Every time I volunteered, I gain 100-fold more than I get. I get back more than I give. And I think that's just a really important lesson to remember, that sort of, what is service, what does it look like? And it's led me to do different things, be it trustees of charity, be it ambassador for Girl Guides. I'm an ambassador for sport for the county council here for Winchester, and being on the tennis club committee. It doesn't really matter, but it's about saying, actually, I'm happy to give my time, and it's not paid work, but it's saying, I want to help. And I think these are the things that, make a difference.
And I think, even from a well-being perspective, there's something very powerful in this, that it moves us, especially with media at the moment, social media, what it pushes us towards, this very binary view of the world, or comparison, to other people and what they're doing in their lives. And then, instead of it being introspection and rumination and my world, it's about actually the broader world and my contribution to it. And I love that. So what do you see as your legacy? What's your aim, your hope for?
Yeah, my legacy is change. My legacy, I think that is what it is. And it's not about me, my legacy, but it's like, what hopefully has my story created and my experiences created. And that is a legacy of change, to enable others to follow, in our footsteps. And I say our footsteps because, I'm one of a group of many pioneering female pilots, and we all are very much focused on helping others to follow in our footsteps. And Jo, who is a great friend of mine, she was the first female fast jet pilot. Her and I are really good friends now, and we both do a similar thing. And we both do a lot of work with the air tattoo as well. And it was so wonderful. We were walking around this year at the Royal International Air Tattoo RIAT at Fairford, and I'm a trustee for the charity, and Jo's one of the ambassadors for the charity as well. So we use all that money to help in STEM related promote, encourage and inspire youngsters to go into STEM related subjects.
Lovely.
And we were wandering around the air show, and literally we were stopped by hundreds of air cadets who were going, oh my goodness, will you sign my hat? And Jo, oh my gosh, Jo. And it was so lovely to see. And you think, you know what? And the best one of all is the fact that I got sent a picture of some air cadets who were at a village fete, and they had made me into a scarecrow. That's my best one ever, that I've got a Girl Guide badge after me and I've been a scarecrow.
Super.
What more do you want? Where's your legacy?
Yeah. We need that in the pictures for the social media as well. Okay, so let's close out. This has been so fascinating. I could speak to you for hours. You truly are inspiring. I must come along to some of your events. Knock on the door, allow me in. Is there one thing that's still a fear or a vulnerability that you have that you're still working through? And number two, what's your top tip for other women and men actually to help them succeed?
Okay, so the fear would probably, I know this sounds ridiculous when you hear everything that I've done, is of being found out. It's still there, the classic imposter syndrome. And I particularly get it when I'm asked to speak to a military audience. And you think, Mandy, I have now spoken to, I think, thousands of events. And yet, if I get asked to speak to a military audience, I think, what have I got to offer? What have I got to tell them? They're all doing the same stuff that I'm talking about. They're going to say, well, we've got more medals than her. We've got more experience than her. Why is she doing what she's doing? And I get this real fear that I'm going to be found out. I don't know what I'm worried they're going to find out. What? That I did what I did and I talk openly about what I did. So, you know what I mean? It's crazy that I do that. And when I do get that fear now, I take myself to the loo and I say, where's the evidence? And there'll never be any evidence. Where's the evidence of a positive outcome? And then I let that feeling come over me. It's an NLP technique, isn't it? And I open the door and I go, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be, boom, confident, and I walk out and don't let it bother me. So that is still one of those things. And my top tip to any leader at all would be your authentic self. You are the best version of you. And that is the one that people like. People can see when someone's putting something on. They can see if someone's, pretending to be stronger. If you are feeling upset, you're feeling upset. If your mum is struggling, and in the end of life, you need help. Be that person that says, I actually need help as well, because I think that's what people want in leadership these days.
Amazing. Mandy, absolutely wonderful. You are a true inspirational role model and leader. Clearly, I look forward to future conversations with you. In the meantime, where can people find out more about you?
I think I'm on every social media. It's either Mandy Hickson or Mandy Hickson Speaker. I think that's on all of the different platforms. My own website as well, I'm going to shock you, is www. You guessed it, mandyhickson.com. So yeah, I'm pretty simple to find. And if you simply Google speaker, fast jet pilot, woman, you're going to get Mandy Hickson.
And I highly recommend her book too. So, Mandy, thank you so much for providing inspiration today. Wishing you every success for the future, where I know you're going to leave such a wonderful legacy. Take care.
Thanks so much, Leigh. Bye-bye.